Can non-alcoholic beer actually taste good? Can the power of the mind affect the ability and overcome the limitations of the body? And how do I take that first step towards achievement and accomplishment to go from where I am today to where I want to be? Hey, my name's Chris Grano, and welcome to this episode of Naperville Real Talk. This is the podcast where we feature the people and the places that make our community here in Naperville an amazing place to call home. Well, if you've ever asked yourself any of those questions, I know you are going to love today's guest. We're going to get into all that and more, but right before we do, make sure you subscribe on whatever platform you're listening or watching to, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube. Share this podcast with a friend. We've got more amazing episodes coming this year, plus additional bonus video content of places, businesses, people right here in Naperville. I can't wait to share that with you. But right now, we're going to get into this amazing conversation with today's guest right after this.
This is the city we call our own. These are the stories of the people we call our neighbors. This is the heartbeat of our hometown. Naperville, this is Real Talk.
All right, welcome back to this episode of Naperville Real Talk. I'm very excited to share with you my next guest. Many of you might know him already, and if you don't, I think you're going to enjoy getting to know him. He's a devoted family man, community member. He is a fitness fanatic. He's an innovator. He's a leader. He is currently the Chief Innovation Officer of Cars.com, and he's the host of the Not Almost There podcast, and especially talking about it today live from the brewery. He is the co-founder and president of Go Brewing right here in Naperville. I'd like to introduce my guest, Joe Chura. Joe, welcome to the podcast.
Chris, thanks for having me today, and thanks for going through that list. It sounds more impressive than it is.
Well, doing my research for the podcast, I found out you wear a lot of hats in addition to the one you're wearing today. So let's get into it. I've got a lot I want to talk to you about. I want to briefly go through kind of your background, but I don't want to dwell on that because I think, sometimes when we get into these discussions, we can just get bogged down in the details of someone's life. And I want to talk more about the way you think and, what's going on in your life right now. But I want to start with a quote that I read in an article talking about you and your wife and your involvement here in Naperville. But it's something that stood out to me. And so this was attributed to you. It says, "It's pretty clear that life is messy. We're not simple beings, nor is the world we live in. No matter where our circumstances are, we're capable of change, and that change begins with one single step." So I'd like that to be kind of the guide for our conversation today. And with that in mind, tell us a little bit about where you came from, the journey through, learning, building a business, and kind of where you are now, and then we'll launch off of that.
What a great way to start the podcast with that quote. I forgot I wrote that, but it was a while ago. So thank you for bringing that up. Gave me chills to hear it back. When you write something, you just never. Most of the time, you don't hear it back. So that was cool. My story's it's been messy. I'm exactly what that quote stated. I grew up in the South Side of Chicago, Southeast Side. Hegwish and Calumet City, bounced around a little bit between those two areas. And then, long story short, found out I was going to be a father at the age of 20. Couldn't even take care of myself really at that time. And had a daughter and needed a good job. Started working at the Chicago assembly plant. It was a fantastic job back then. I found myself immersed in this world of manufacturing. Was given a job to work on the assembly line, put in seatbelts, B-pillars, scuff plates in the 1998 Ford Taurus, slowly rolling down the line at 72 cars per hour. It was the most popular car in America back then. So there's plenty of work. The problem with it was I hated every second of it. I just did not like it. And surrounding me were people that were just so vested in their career there. In fact, I called it the countdown on some publications I've wrote and when I public speak. And the countdown is simply, how many more years do I have left till I retire? And at Ford, at 30 years, you can retire with a full pension. That was a common language amongst everyone in that entire plant. And you kind of would intro yourself with how many years you have left. And very quickly I realized, I'm like, man, I just don't want to be here in 10 years. But I had two choices. I could find another job. I was far from marketable. Didn't have a college degree. I was kind of barely got through high school. So that wasn't really an option. Or I could put myself through school. I could take advantage of some of these programs Ford had. So I chose the latter and found some time to study in between building cars. I had a few seconds, which is what I joke and say often is if you have a 1998 Taurus, check your seatbelts because chances are I put them on. But in all seriousness, that was it was those small incremental steps of studying and in between building these cars that changed my entire life. And it really taught me the power of like small incremental things and how over time they could turn into big things. And when I speak and, that quote you read it's really about that. It's about these little changes over time that can make a big difference. So, it took me about 5 years to graduate college while working on the assembly line, worked my way up through Ford Motor Company, was at Ford for a total of 10 years, left in 2008. I eventually got into the marketing and sales division at Ford, left in 2008 to become a car dealer. Worst time ever in the history of like automobile selling was like 2008. Like I was like probably the only GM checking Twitter to see if the dealership was going to close, if GM was going to shutter our doors because many closed back then. And it was just kind of a crazy, tumultuous time. And again, I found myself in a job that I didn't really love, but it was extremely difficult, extremely challenging. I learned a ton, but I just did not have a passion for it. But what I did have a passion for was digital marketing and coding and computers and things like that. So I kind of harnessed all those passions and put them to work, creating a digital marketing agency in 2011 called Launch, really just helping dealers. It was just a fortuitous thing that now all of a sudden I had a background in automotive. So I found myself in this career that would have never happened had I not had a daughter when I was 20 years old. And that's kind of how it started. And I hadn't looked back since. That company grew in 2011 to probably about 50 employees before I created another company called Dealer Inspire in 2013 that focused on software for automotive dealers. Both companies collectively grew to this last year 850 employees.
Wow.
Close to $150 million in annualized revenue, over 5,500 clients, 45 OEMs. Just an unbelievable thing that I couldn't even, if you told my 20-year-old self that, I would not believe you. And it was more my team than anyone else that made all those things happen. But it was just kind of starting, just putting those steps forward, as we alluded to already, that allowed that opportunity to emerge. And this last year, I stepped down as CEO of those companies, moved into a role as Chief Innovation Officer at Cars.com for a different break, and had been working on this brewery project that I'm sure we're going to talk about today, creating the first NA brewery, one of the first in the country, definitely the first in Illinois. And that has been such a huge passion project of mine, combining everything I love: beer, digital marketing, events, and along the way, in 2008, got married to my wife. We have two kids, 10, 12, and then my daughter, who I mentioned the beginning of the story. You can figure out my age quick. She's now 24 years old, and yeah, I live in Naperville and love it. Feel super blessed to be able to do what I do and use the things that I've learned for something I'm super passionate about.
So thank you for catching us up on that, because I think, it sets the stage for what you're doing now with Go Brewing, what you're doing involved in the community. And I want to dig into all those different things. Just kind of on a side note, because I have a passion for digital marketing in my own world. And I'm curious, I have to ask you about the auto industry. So, folks who watch this podcast know that I'm involved in real estate locally, and we always joke around in our industry that it's so behind the times when it comes to digital marketing. And, it's like you see a lot of the photos of real estate agents, with the dog and the turtleneck, and it's almost like a gag, right? And in reading a little bit about you and about Dealer Inspire, it feels like maybe the auto industry had that lag too in terms of adopting new technologies, not necessarily in the actual manufacturing process, right? They're probably on the cutting edge, but in terms of sales and marketing. Would you agree with that?
Yes, it's funny. I think every industry thinks they're behind in some way, right? If you go to construction, the construction industry, oh my God, they are behind compared to ours, right? Automotive and the housing market, real estate. I would say that I saw a gap, and I filled that gap, and it was just the right time for me to fill that gap. And had that not happened at that time, it would be a different story today. It's far different. It's far more. It was extremely competitive then. Lots of capital in that industry. But what happens is when you have more players that are competing, and because of the nature of digital marketing, it allows for low friction businesses to start. Meaning, or said differently, like you don't need a lot of capital to create a business anymore, right? You got Amazon Web Services, you got a computer, you can be up and running tomorrow. You could literally learn some digital marketing, walk into a dealership, and probably sell your services just like you can in most places. The thing I'll say is that competition, because it's easy, is making everyone better. No matter what industry you're in, if you have competition, you can't rest on your laurels anymore. You better get on it, otherwise you're going to be obsolete. And I would say that auto was always competitive. It's still competitive today. But for what I did, I just had this perfect window of opportunity that I took advantage of.
And so I appreciate you went kind of quickly through some of your story, but again, in terms of what I've read and a little bit of how you told it in other platforms, you faced some setbacks over, getting started. Like you said, a job that you didn't love. You found the time to increase your education. You found the time to find opportunities within Ford and then beyond. But each step along the way had some challenges that you had to overcome. So kind of the first big question I want to ask you is, what gave you the audacity to think that you could do that? When you had those challenges, was there someone in your family that inspired you? Was there a public figure that inspired you? Was it a faith thing? What gave you the ability to think, I can improve my circumstances?
That's a good question. When I look back on just how I lived my life, I think of this story, and I was at the Doug Collins basketball camp when I was a kid. And I remember watching these older guys play. Older meaning maybe they were 10 years older than me, but they were really good basketball players. And this peer group I was in, this kid looked at me and he said, would you rather play like that guy or have the body like this other guy that was pretty built, right? And my immediate response was, and it was so honest, was neither. I want to be myself. I'm going to be better than them. I just had this competitive drive in me to not want to satisfy to be someone else. And I think that I've been blessed to have is this tenacity to say, I'm going to prove it to you. And that's what gave me maybe the audacity, is that naturally I had this kind of spirit that I'm I'm going to do my own thing, and I'm going to lead, and I'm not going to follow. That doesn't mean that there's not a time and place to follow and to learn from other people. Oh my God, I would not be here today if I didn't learn. But it's clear that I don't see something and be oh my God, I wish I was that person. No, it's put in the work and the effort and go after it and be better than what you think you can become. And that was the mindset that I had. And then I also had this mindset that if someone can do it, so can I. And I always live by that. I'm man, if that person, what can I not learn? And we are so blessed with the internet today. And at the time I was learning digital marketing, I had been kind of a coder when I was a kid. My brothers would play video games, and I would be on the Commodore 64 writing these programs, make spaceships fly around. And so I always just had a passion for that. And that was really important to me too, is like what I ended up doing wasn't even work. I mean, as you grow a company, it shifts from like passion to more work stuff like HR and, you know, all the stuff you don't want to do. But initially when you're starting, it's really all about passion. And I lost my sense of time. So it was just like, all right, so I found something I loved. I wouldn't even consider it work. And another quick story is my wife and I, it's like 2010, and I'm sitting there next to her and I'm building this like website on the weekend, and she's watching Bravo. She's watching Real Housewives. And she looks at me and she goes, "Why are you always working?" And I look at her, I'm like, this is what I do for fun. Like, you're watching this for fun. This is what I do for fun. And that's when I knew like there was some magic there, because you could, if you are competing against someone that considers that work, they're dead in the water. They are dead in the water. You're going to naturally outwork them because it's not work. So I think all of those kind of things combined just gave me this sense of confidence that I can do it. And then kind of going back to what I was talking about, the internet, you can learn anything. Like, I would take any waking moment and I would put on these podcasts, SEO 101 and these digital marketing podcasts that were emerging in 2010 and 2011. And I remember I was like mowing my lawn in Elgin, Illinois, where I lived at the time. My wife and I built a house out there, and I would listen to these podcasts. And my wife's like, "You couldn't come back in and be so immersed in this content." And somehow many of us, like, we say we don't have time, but like it's not even time. You're not prioritizing the things, or you're working on things that are not passion to you. They're not fun, so they're gonna be harder. You're gonna put those things off. So if you have the right attitude that you can do it, and you find something that you love to do, and then you take the steps to actually do it, it's not a complicated equation. You're gonna be successful at some level.
Yeah, there's so many things you said that kind of resonated that I want to hit on. I mean, you talked about time management. You talked about focusing on things that are important to you, that are passionate to you. One of the things I'm curious about is, a lot of what I see your story is accomplishment. It's not just business accomplishment, but obviously, we'll get into health and community involvement. One of the things that I always wonder is, and maybe you don't know the answer, but I'm just curious to hear what you think. We can just kind of spitball it for a minute. What do you think the difference is between two people maybe, who come from very similar circumstances, very similar backgrounds? And I get there are factors in life, right, that make things more difficult for one person versus another. Certainly there's all kinds of circumstances in life, but what is it that makes one person in that circumstance rise up and have that drive, like you talked about, that competitive nature to accomplish, and maybe the other person just kind of lets life happen to them? Is that just born into us? Is that environmental? You have any thoughts on that?
It's a great question, and we could probably develop a thesis around this, and you could read books on it like Angela Duckworth, Grit, and many others that are just built around this subject alone. And I think at the end of the day, there's not a definitive answer, right? Like, in fact, in her book Grit, the one I just mentioned, she doesn't really have a definitive answer to it, although it's just someone's ability to be patient and to put in that work when no one's looking. And I don't know if that gets triggered in people. I think for me, it got triggered. I don't think I was always like that. I think I had a decent work ethic up until I was 20, but then when I saw an opportunity, I didn't stop. And it was because all of those things I already mentioned. But someone else, like, it's hard for me to think about another human and the way they think. But I will say success leaves clues, and there's a lot of commonality amongst people that are successful, and you see them. Are you born with that or not? Are you triggered or not? Did something happen to make you realize that there's more opportunity and then you can do it. I've also lived by this kind of philosophy, like, if not now, when? Many times we say words like tomorrow or next week. And certainly my wife and I have done that regarding like our diet, right? Like, we're going to drink pizza and beer tonight because we're starting the diet on Monday. Like, oh my God,
Right.
like we did that 1,000 times. Like, this isn't about perfection. This isn't about like you're so disciplined. No, it's a matter of like, more often than not, you're working toward your goal. And if you can get to like an 80-20 kind of Pareto principle of anything that you do, I don't care if it's diet, I don't care if it's work ethic, I don't care if it's whatever, you're going to probably get the outcomes that you want. But where does it come from? I don't have a great answer there, except you clearly see traits of people that are successful, I would say, and they're fairly similar.
And I think you said something that I would agree with, and I do think it can be taught. So I think I'm with you. I don't know exactly where it comes from. I think it's probably, like you mentioned, a mix of all sorts of things, right? Our circumstances, our personality type, how we were raised, divine intervention. It could be a little bit of everything, but I think it can be taught. You said success leaves clues, and I think you mentioned even before about learning from those who have gone before us. When I talk to young people in the real estate business or whatever, or people getting married, people having kids, and people might ask advice, how did you do this or how did you do that? That's the best way to go about it, is look at people who have achieved whatever it is you want to achieve, right? Whether it's physical health, whether it's a great marriage relationship, whether it's business success, talk to those people and ask them how they did it. You don't have to reinvent the wheel if you follow in what folks have done. And then, like you said, then aim for higher than them, aim for better than them, right? And it can be done.
The one thing I want to add to that, and by the time this airs, dry January will probably be over, but the dry January campaign that we're doing here, I send out like a daily text message of motivation to people that sign up for it. And the one yesterday really even resonated with me as I was typing it. And kind of going back to another story, when I was at the plant, at the Chicago semi plant, working on the semi line, my dream, no joke, my vision of myself was to be a supervisor at the plant, to hold this radio and walk around and not be on the line, but lead the line and bark orders to people on the line. And when I look at that moment in my life, that was my dream, because the environment of which I was in, that's all I could see. So if you can get out of an environment, you will have a much better chance of seeing something that you didn't know was there. And I can tell you that goes with your circles of friends that you're hanging out with. That goes for what you're seeing in your social media feeds.
Yeah.
Like right now, it's kind of crazy what's happening to me. So I'm a moderate drinker. I don't drink a ton anymore, but I'm certainly not someone who's completely sober. Yet my feeds are filled with people that are in recovery and sobriety. What does that make me feel when I see that? Does that draw me to that or away from that? It draws me to it. I'm seeing these people that are successful, living their lives, like just free from this chain that they had on them. And I think that is exactly what folks should do if they find themselves in a rut. Get out of your environment, and you will be shocked at what's out there. And it may seem so small, but it was so huge for me. And then constantly change. So the next step of that was I became a car dealer. Well, I told my wife, I was like, my dream is to own this car dealership in Valparaiso, Indiana. And she's like, hell no, I'm not moving to Valpo. No offense to anyone there. I think Valpo is a great area. But she's like, I'm not moving there. And I was like, okay, well, that dream's gone if I want to stay married. And then it allowed me to expand my vision of what's possible well beyond being a car dealer. And that's the problem we get stuck in often. It's like you're in this path and you open this door to this room, and you're limited by what's around you on those walls. but you really got to go through it and open a new door, and you might see something totally different.
So I heard a survey that came out just this past weekend, and one of the stats on it was that only 36% of Americans feel they will be better off 5 years from now than they are today. And like I feel like I'm pretty in tune to the culture, and that one kind of blew me away. Like I couldn't imagine, and I'm agree with this statement or disagree with the statement, but I feel like we're still today in the greatest country in the world to be able to improve your situation and however you want to do it, right? And so for people who live in this country to think that 5 years from now they're going to be stuck where they are, or maybe even worse, I couldn't imagine it. And then I realized you just said we have these trappings, and again, it could be conditional, it could be how we were taught as kids, but we feel so limited to what we can achieve. And it's really hard, I think, to think big. And I struggle with it all the time. I'm trying to look past and go, okay, where do I want to be 20 years from now? That's hard to think that way. But what you said in the first few minutes of this conversation was, it's a single step. It's step by step. And it's good to have that vision, but if you only think about that end result, you might be too intimidated to start.
To me, it starts and stops at a vision board, and that's it. Like I do not think 5 years out. I do not think 20 years out. I think I might have a vision board of like, here's where I want to go. And I created one years ago. It's funny how much of it came to a reality. But that said, I did it once. Like I don't sit there and think about the present. I think about what can I do today. And I think that's really important. To go back to what you said though, I want people to give themselves a little bit of grace, because the technology that is in our hands that you are addicted to, like me, feeds you information that will inadvertently make you think a certain way. And why do they do that? Because the number one thing that these apps care about is attention. The number one thing is time on site. It's how long can I get this person to stay on my app? Well, they're not going to do that by feeding you positive news if you're into seeing negative news. They're not going to feed you negative news if you're into seeing positive news. They're going to feed you what is right for you. So if you wake up and the first thing you do is look at the news in the morning, what are you going to see? You're going to see negativity. What are you going to be in a better mood or a worse mood? Just answer that. Like, are you going further or closer away to where you want to be? That goes without saying, right? So then now you're kind of playing this. Now you're seeing the world with this lens. And now you constantly get this bereavement of more and more negative stuff in your feed. And all of a sudden you're having a conversation. You're going to approach that conversation in a negative way. And you don't even realize it, because the technology is so freaking good that you have no idea what happened. And then rinse and repeat that 365 days a year. And you tell me that you're not going to have a different mindset on something. That is why that poll that you just mentioned is scary. Take those people that said that 35%, I guarantee you their habits are formed around something negative.
Yeah, absolutely. It's what you mentioned before is the circle of people that you surround yourself with, what you read, what you consume. It's going to completely change you. And it happens pretty quickly, because I've seen similar studies done that when people, take a break from social media, or when people start reading daily affirmations or say a prayer or a meditation, it doesn't take very long. It's not like that takes a year or 2 years to change their attitude. Honestly, it takes a matter of days. And in some instances, they've done brain studies where just literally repeating affirming words or saying things you're grateful for, in the very moment, it changes the way your brain thinks. And so imagine doing that over and over and over again. I want to use that as a segue and talk about Go Brewing. I know it's not maybe how we would think of it, but I think the thing that has drawn me to Go Brewing more than anything is, so right off the bat, I'm actually a big non-alcoholic beer fan. But when I first started seeing about the fact that you guys were going to be coming to Naperville, it wasn't even so much about the beer. It was like already there was a story around you, and you might have helped been crafting it, but that this was going to be a place for community. And now that you guys have been open a while, and I'm seeing it on the social media, and it's like there is this like family, it seems like, of people that have lots of things in common, fitness, maybe sobriety, or maybe just general health, like you've talked about, not being, too heavy of a drinker, and then just community. And you guys are doing run clubs and workouts and all kinds of things. How describe that feeling about Grow Brewing, and then we can talk about the beer.
I mean, you hit it on. You did a great job describing it. I think it's about community. It's about a place of inclusiveness where people can come together, whether you don't drink at all or whether you are a moderate drinker. You can come here if you like to drink a lot. I mean, we have guest beers on tap too, and so that's what it was designed for. Is just that. And we have cohorts of people that are into different things. So we have a cohort of people that are into yoga, and they don't like to get after it in the run club and the Murph and the CrossFit style workouts. We have a group of people that want to kind of experiment, and that's when we do breath training and Wim Hof and cold plunges and things that you're like, why the hell does a brewery have bathtubs? Like, I remember it was hilarious. We were doing this build out, and all of a sudden, we were getting packages like crazy, and the GC's like, what the hell is this? And 2 huge tubs come. And I'm like, yes, my cold plungers are here. And they're just like these big Rubbermaid things. But I mean, it is such a blessing to introduce things that I love to the broader community around here that otherwise maybe wouldn't try it. And they're pushing themselves out of their comfort zone. So that's incredible. I'll say, Chris, that part of the community that I didn't anticipate to be as large as it is the recovery community and the people that come in here for health reasons. We developed a persona for the brand, and that persona was like embarrassingly like a mirror image of myself, right? It's like 40-year-old dad or 45-year-old mom and has kids. They can't drink as much because they're gaining weight. They feel lousy. They don't want hangovers, and developed this whole brand image. The first day we opened, 50% of the people in here are people that can't drink or that don't drink, or people in for whatever reason, health reasons, recovery. And what I didn't realize is that people are on such a different spectrum when it comes to alcohol consumption. You have the spectrum of people like my brother, that he was in rehab for the better part of 2 years now. He's a recovering alcoholic. He's doing fantastic. He cannot have any of our beer. I would not let him. He can come in here. So he's on the spectrum where he could come in here, but he can't have our beer. Then there's other people that can't even come in here because they're on the far end of that spectrum, because it'll trigger them. Then as you go toward the other side of that, you have people that drink any beer every day, and they're perfectly fine, and they're recovering. I didn't see that one coming. I thought about people in health reasons, of course, that they can't drink, but I didn't see that. I thought that would be taboo to offer people in recovery, people that can't drink, non-alcoholic beer. And I can tell you what, man, it's been the biggest blessing, because those folks are here and they have gratitude, and the community that they're bringing, they feel welcome. They haven't had a place to go. It is absolutely incredible. And you don't feel like this is a sacrifice to be here. It's not a mediocre brewery to be in. We put a lot of effort in here to make it very nice and inclusive. So I'm really proud of that. And that community is growing every day. We have over 400 people doing the Dry Jan challenge with us that are getting those text messages. And a fun fact on that challenge, 75% of them, that we just did a poll, not quite the 400, the people that took the poll said they want to continue on beyond January. So whether or not they do it and how long they do it, they're getting closer to where they want to be in their life, not further away by doing this challenge. So long-winded answer to say, like, the community here has been incredible. I'm so proud of it, and I can't wait to kind of see where this goes.
That's a great observation about the spectrum of where people are at in relationship to, their consumption of alcohol. So just to share the way I got into non-alcoholic beer is I have family members that have been now sober for decades, that were in rehab when they were younger, struggled with alcohol, and have been sober since then and have been able to enjoy non-alcoholic beer throughout that whole time. I myself never struggled with alcoholism, but had some little health challenges within the last couple of years. And one of the recommendations from doctors was, just don't drink alcohol, which I didn't do a lot of in the first place. So I said, okay, no big deal. But I like the taste of beer, and I was already had kind of a relationship with an alcoholic beer because of family members. So I thought, cool, that's fine. I can totally do that. What blew me away and what I want to talk to you about too is, wow, how far an alcoholic beer has come, because I remember sipping on, in the 90s, sipping on a family member's Sharps or Old Duels, and no disrespect to those companies, but boy, they didn't represent at that time beer very well. And the non-alcoholic beers of today are completely different. They're doing blind taste tests with some of these major brands where people can't tell the difference between the NA version versus the real version. How have you seen the growth of NA beer just in pop culture, and any thoughts on how the technology has changed to where it actually tastes like real beer now?
What's funny is that we share a parking lot with Automotive in Naperville, and we had this happened multiple times, but the most recent time we had someone that came in here about an hour before we opened. And anyone that comes in here, we're kind of here anyway, so we just let them in. We don't say, hey, we're open in an hour from now. It's just not like that. So he goes to the bar. We ask him what he wants. He said a hazy IPA. We give him a hazy IPA. I go back and talk to him 45 minutes later. He's working. I said, hey, do you normally drink non-alcoholic beer? And he looked at me like I was nuts. He goes, no, I'm drinking a hazy. And I said, no, I mean, do you normally drink non-alcoholic beer? And he's just and he looked at the board and he realized he wasn't in Solomos. He was here for an hour. He thought he was at another brewery. So to your point, people are, and I would have gladly tell him where Solomos is. I had no idea he didn't know that. That happens all the time. So the beer is made in a way where it's not so much technology and machines, at least here. A lot of breweries operate that way. A lot of breweries use a vacuum distillation process or some membrane filtration to take out the alcohol once it's produced. What we do here, and anyone can come here who's listening to this podcast, and I'll give you a personal tour, is we brew the beer in such a way that it just doesn't make a lot of alcohol. So you get a really good taste. You can brew a lot of different flavors, and you don't have this processing that's being done to take the alcohol out. So it's a very natural, clean feeling. We have some machines that are necessary evils, like a pasteurizer, and that is for the safety of the product. That is for the canning and packaging to make sure that the beer is safe. Well, people also ask, why is not NA beer just as expensive? Well, to make alcohol, it's really yeast, right? And yeast isn't that expensive. That's not the expensive part, but to make NA beer, it's actually a lot more expensive than non-alcoholic beer because you have to have all these other safety mechanisms in place because alcohol doesn't have the preservatives, because non-alcohol doesn't have the same things in it to kill off anything that can grow. So you have to kind of help it along through pasteurization and other things. Okay.
So I want to come back and talk a little bit more about the brewery, but I don't want to skip over your podcast. So, because obviously we're on a podcast, I feel like we have to kind of give a nod to that. So Not Almost There. I read the story about where that title came from in terms of your running the 2015 Chicago Marathon, right? Was that your first marathon?
Yep.
And you see the sign that says Not Almost There. And it's so funny. I read that story and I laughed because I'm sitting here right now with sore legs because I ran 3 miles yesterday, which for me is a lot. So I've never ran a marathon.
That's great though.
But I mean, I'm thinking I've so had those moments where you're running, and we were talking yesterday with the guys I was running with, and we're like, oh, it's right around the bend. We're back to the parking lot right around the bend, and we come around the bend, and we're like, oh no, that's the other bend. You realize, you have that moment of realization that, oh man, I'm not really there yet. Like, talk about that feeling and how you overcome that, and talk a little bit about the podcast. I mean, you've had some amazing guests on. Talk about some of your favorites.
Yeah, thank you. So to your point, I was running the Chicago Marathon, and I think the biggest drastic thing that happened is I went from such a high to such a low. It wasn't this gradual thing. It was like I had a runner's high. If anyone has had that as a runner, it doesn't happen a ton, but when it happens, you feel really good. You got these endorphins that are building up, and it's dopamine, and you're just like ready to go, and you feel great. Like, man, I could keep running forever. And that's what happened at like mile 12. I was like, this is nothing. I could do 2 of these things. Like, why does everyone think a marathon so hard? And I'm running, and I get to like mile 13, and this, there's signs everywhere, and they're funny, and they're inspiring, and thousands and thousands of people holding up these signs. And this one says, not almost there. And I looked at it, and I kind of shrugged it off, and I get maybe another 50 steps, and then I started thinking about it. And man, that might as well have been a stop sign. That might as well have been hey, you need to stop the race here. Why are you in it? And it just fed my mind with all this negativity. And because I had all that negativity, I started to have physical manifestations like cramps, and I couldn't run, and I was tired. And this was happening at mile 14. I had 12 more miles to go, So I was just like, there's no way in hell that I'm not going to finish this thing. I just got to keep going. And I did. And it was a shit show. It was like, I walked. At one point, I think I laid down. Like, it was a mess, And I finished it. And then when I looked back at that moment, I thought, like, what changed? Was I ready for it? Probably not as ready as I should have been. But what changed is my mindset. And I went on this quest ever since to create a podcast, Not Almost There, to get guests on and just really talk about mindset. Like, how do you overcome those things? And to your point, I've been blessed with having some amazing guests on the podcast. I can't name like a person because there's so many great ones. But I will tell you that the first podcast I ever did was with Tony Hawk. And the only reason I got Tony Hawk, for the record, was I had this conference called Refuel in Naperville, and he was coming out to Refuel. So I'm like, damn, why aren't I just like asking him to be on a podcast? And that's what happened. I mean, you're not going to call Tony Hawk and get him on a podcast if you have never created an episode. You know what I mean? Yep. So I'm start to record this podcast, super nervous. I'm in Yellow Box Church. And as you know, when you're the host and you don't have a big team around you, which no one really starts a podcast like that, you kind of got to be the audio guy, the video guy, the tech guy. You just have to wear all the hats. You got to make sure people aren't coming in the room. So it gets stressful, and it's hard enough to have a conversation and keep it going. You're doing a great job, by the way. But it's, there's a lot to it. So I'm with Tony Hawk, super nervous, and I hit record, or I think I hit record on my Rodecaster Pro, which is this thing that you record podcasts on. And I'm about 20 minutes in this conversation talking about my experience watching when I was a kid, like Paulo Peralta, just like going deep in some nerdy skateboard stuff because I used to be a skateboarder and I love skateboarding. And realized 20 minutes into it, I didn't hit record. And I was like, you gotta be kidding me. How do I say this to him? And I said, hey man, I am so sorry. I did not hit record. Can we kind of start over? And he's like, sure, man. Like, he was so cool about it, but I couldn't really restart the conversation the right way. All that magic that we had, even though it wasn't probably that good, the conversation, we got into some cool stuff, and it was just one of those things. So I really believe everyone should have a podcast because you will learn discipline. You will learn how to have different conversations with people. You're going to push yourself out of your comfort zone. it's hard, like all aspects of it are difficult. So I think everyone should try it, especially with the technology. It makes it easier, and don't overthink it. But along the way, I had people like Rich Roll. That was a podcast that I really liked because I just like Rich's spirit and personality. I've had people like Amy Purdy on, who's she spoke at Refuel as well. She got meningitis when she was 19 years old, perfectly healthy woman, and all of a sudden she's in a hospital in a coma, comes out of it 2 months later and lost her legs. She recovers from that to be a world-class snowboarder champion. Chris Gardner I had on, which is just amazing, like grandfather-esque, like human beings with odes of wisdom. So there's definitely been a lot of people that have inspired me, and I've taken some out of everyone. And I noticed some of those commonalities that we talked about. And the one thing looking back, and this is a knock on drinking. Again, I drink, but I noticed that every one of those people don't really drink alcohol. Every one of those people wake up early. Every one of those people didn't have anything really handed to them. They, think about the Chris Gardner story of The Pursuit of Happiness. If anyone's seen that movie, like there's a lot of like common traits among those folks. And again, success leaves clues. What do they do? Yeah. What do they do differently? You don't want to emulate them, but can you take some things from them and start to put them in your own life? And that's kind of what I've been doing, because surrounding myself with those conversations versus the negative ones have been a huge benefit.
You're right. That's an incredible thing about a podcast, is being able to have those conversations with people who, maybe have a handle on one aspect of life more than you do, and you'd be able to learn from them. I saw that one of the guests we had in common was Lucy Westlake from here in Naperville.
Oh yeah.
And she, like, as I was thinking about that, some of the things she talked about, we talked about the difference between like a big goal and just getting started. And when I talked to her last year, she had just become the first American woman the youngest American woman to climb Mount Everest. And it's not like when she was 6 years old, she said, I'm going to climb Mount Everest one day. It's just something that they started doing. And the next step became, okay, well, what's the next challenge that I can do? And what's the next thing I can do? And then here she is now, right? And she's have these amazing partnerships. So I think for people who think like, if I don't have this amazing goal, like you talked about, if I don't have this 20 or 25 or 30 year goal in mind, and if I'm not going to think I'm going to be a world changing person, then I'll never do anything. That's totally the wrong approach, right? And I wanted to ask you about fitness. I mean, that's the same thing with fitness. And I will tell you from personal experience, my biggest struggle in fitness in my life was always only looking at the end result, or like you said, right? Like, well, I want to have that guy's body, right? I want to have that. I want to look like that, or I want to be like that. And when you really start to get into it, is you just go, I'm just gonna go work out tomorrow. I'm just gonna go run with some guys tomorrow. And then as you do it, and as you gain accountability through creating a community around it, like you're doing at Go Brewing, then it starts to really spiral, and then the competitiveness kicks in. Is that true of your fitness journey as well?
Oh yeah, man. I was embarrassingly out of shape, and I wouldn't run with anyone because I was just ashamed of like how I ran and how slow I was and how I just get so winded and I'm still not all in, I could keep up with people, but I'm definitely not a stellar CrossFit athlete or over-index in really anything. But I love trying things, and I love to get to sweat a little bit and to do something hard, because I know if I'm doing something hard, I'm moving myself toward the direction I want to be. And that's just, at this age, it's just to be healthier, just to be so my kids look up to me later in life and even now, and maybe start to model some of that versus the opposite. Like I've seen it go the other way, where you have a parent that sits around and maybe drinks a ton, and you have two choices. You could sit there and make excuses that was your model, or you can start to do something about it. But Yeah, as far as fitness, man, it has been such a journey. And it's just those waking up every day, even if it's a mundane thing, and doing something. But man, if there's one thing I could tell people is like, do it early, get up before everyone else in your house. I know it's hard. You don't have a lot of time. That way, you're playing offense. You're playing offense in your day. Because let's face it, life is messy. Like, kids are crazy. Like you're gonna have the best intentions, but man, you're gonna be so drained from dealing with them. Like when I drop off my daughter from school, I feel like I accomplished something. I'm like, man, she's there and she's on time, and that's great. That takes energy. Oh my God, parents, I give so much credit. It's just kids are a lot, so you have to get in front of that. If you don't get in front of it, it's just harder, and it's about making things easier. And even if you can do it for 10 minutes, start somewhere. So that'd be my one piece of advice. The second thing is get something on the calendar. It makes everything more meaningful. Like, I don't care if it's a 5K for St. Patty's Day that's coming up. Like, get it on the calendar, develop a training plan, get a Garmin watch, get a program. It'll feed you the workouts. You'll get motivated, and just go after it. And you will be shocked at how much you can change your mindset toward working out. I've seen it. I see it all the time. I mean, there's countless stories. If someone else could do it, you can too.
Yeah, I totally agree with the idea of getting up early. We talked offline a few days ago about F3, which is a local men's workout group in Naperville.
Yeah.
And one of the things I love that a lot of the guys will say is, doesn't it feel good to know that you're accomplishing the hardest thing that you're going to do all day, at 5 a.m. or whatever time it is, and it is a really good mindset thing, right? To be able to do something hard right away and then know, man, I can do anything now, now that I've done this, especially especially if it's outside and it's cold or whatever. Hey, I want to respect your time, Joe. I want to ask you, just tell us what's coming next for Go Brewing. And if you would too, just hit on, I know you're involved in a ton of ways in the community on serving on local boards. So if you can answer 2 questions for me, what's next for Go Brewing, upcoming events and things like that? And then for anybody who's looking to get involved here in Naperville, because that's what this podcast is all about, what's like one step they could take just to get involved with a local nonprofit or something like that?
Yeah, great question. So what's next for Go Brewing? We have a lot on our events calendar. So as far as what we're doing here, whenever you're listening to this, check out gobrewing.com, click on upcoming events, and you'll see everything from live music to the things that we talked about today, workouts, yoga. We're doing Tai Chi and Qigong at the end of February. We have casino night coming up. We have a bags tournament for kids and adults coming up at the end of February. So we're just always trying different things. And I'd like to welcome anyone who's listening to this here. And again, find me. I'll give you a personal tour. And think about us for a private event or us, to work from here, to work from Go. Like, you could have an NA beer and get your work done. It's kind of mind-boggling, and someone might question you, but there's not alcohol in our beer, so you'll be good. And Go is starting to develop a national presence. I'm trying to put my foot on the gas with that a little bit. It's super awesome to be able to have a website to sell online, and we sell across the United States to 43 different states. And I'm going to keep doing that and keep it growing, and would be so honored for anyone listening to this to check out our beer. We're in local bottle shops now, some restaurants. Come in to Go Brewing, buy online if you're listening to this and you're not in the area. And as far as getting involved with local charities, and there is so much opportunity. There's over, I thought it was 100, and then someone said 200. I don't know how many nonprofits there are in Naperville, but there's well over 100.
Yeah, I think it's over 200. Yeah.
Yeah, it's incredible. So there's, I'm not going to name drop different ones. I'm on the board of 4 or 5 different local organizations in Naperville. If you have an interest, any of the ones that I'm on, you can look those up, let me know. But also, you can volunteer. You can be a part of the community in a lot of different ways. There's Loaves and Fishes has a great volunteer program. you can volunteer at a race, talk about being around, motivational things. St. Patty's Day race is coming up. So there's just an endless amount of opportunity. I highly encourage you to get in contact with me, and I know quite a lot of charities, or I can put you in contact with many people. But come in here, have a happy hour, socialize, and I'm sure there's a fit for you.
Joe, thank you so much, man. We covered a lot of ground today. It was awesome talking about what you've gone through, what you've accomplished, what you're doing now. I think there's probably some people that listen today that are going to come away with maybe a game plan or some inspiration. Tell folks how we can find you online, Go Brewing online, where you're at, locally here in Naperville.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. GoBrewing.com is probably the best place. We're on all social media, Go Brewing. We are right off of Ogden and Quincy Avenue, behind kind of the Cadillac dealership off of Ogden. So many people don't even know we're here still. So you can come back here. We are open during the week now at noon, except on Mondays. And we have people in our tap room right now working. So it's a real thing. And look at it as an alternative to a coffee shop. Live music every weekend as well. So no shortage of ways to get a hold of me. I'm usually here, so I'd love to meet with you, and it'd be my pleasure.
Thanks again, Joe. Can't wait to talk to you again, and we'll see you at the brewery.
Chris, thanks, man. Appreciate it.